This perplexing art was made by a famous pair of twins, Anna and Elena Balbuso, also known as the Balbuso twins, an internationally recognized Italian artist duo from Milan. Their artwork has been published by major international publishers and companies throughout the world, and they've illustrated over 50 books. Since the age of 3, they've been drawing together and collaborating on the same pictures. These girls are not just twins, but they also share the same mind and artistic vision. Speaking about their creative beginnings at this very young age, they said, "We drew the figures upside down with the head at the bottom and then turned the sheet over. We drew always and everywhere, on the walls of the house, objects, sheets." Their work can be eerie, abstract, modern, old-fashioned, and very skilled and unique. If anyone should go down in our time for mixing modern and digital media while also showing previous styles, all seamlessly woven together, I think it should be the Balbuso sisters. I think this is why they have such acclaim. Their work is very well done. They choose to mix traditional physical media such as acrylic, pen, pencil, watercolor, collage, and paper with digital media like Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. However, they do not use virtual paintbrushes. They do all their paintings by hand, and then on programs like Photoshop, they do multiple digital color proofs, and their final work is in the digital format. Most of my favorite work from them is their illustrations for certain books, such as The Canterbury Tales, Eugene Onegin, and Leorla. Most of the art shown in this video are those book illustrations. You can find it all organized by book on their website, which I'll show in the description. Myth and fairy tale are very important in art, and so is enjoyment of the craft itself, something that we've sort of left behind with the rise of conceptual art and the abandonment of traditional forms and motifs. I believe that both myth and craft are key to creating a 21st century art that can compete with the rot that we have today. You can even see how the girls take the invented designs of Theodore Kittelsen and his fantastical forest creatures like trolls and other northern mythical creatures, which he invented in the late 19th century and created a whole genre, beloved still in Norway. Creating something striking and new that takes pleasure in its own making without being a meaningless nothing at the end, where you're left wondering what was it all for, explainable by a few words as a distant, abstract concept and nothing more. To really make something into art, you need subjects and content, meaning, as well as the careful crafting of the thing itself. Whether it's visual art, music, theater, dance, etc. These girls do so well what is the true task of art, using archaic and imaginative forms and faces while modernizing them in style and technique. I think it's specifically their use of symbolism, echoing both medieval art and also the Romantic and Symbolist movements, within a somewhat digitized format, which makes them so novel. They have said that they rely on a strong knowledge of art history for their projects, which is usually required when illustrating books and period costumes. They said, there is not a specific art period, but art in general, from ancient Roman mural painting like the frescoes at Pompeii, the Italian Renaissance, Romanticism, modern art, such as symbolism, surrealism, Russian constructivism, Italian futurism, and contemporary art. You can see the art that they're clearly inspired by from looking at these movements. Yet the twins' modern emanations of these still feel very careful and holistically envisioned within the mind's eye, which is what's necessary for true art to happen. It isn't the greatest work that's possible in our time, of course, but there's definitely something interesting there that I think current artists can learn from and admire in their own work, if we are to keep creating new art that rings true somehow. The ones that I think are good are a lot more intricate, symbolically complex, and nuanced, full of artfulness and detail, relying less on modern visual fads and optical techniques using digital media, and more on a whole aesthetic image. I want to now get into what I mean by this craftsmanship and pleasure in creation. I am somewhat inspired here by the words of John Ruskin, one of the founders of the arts and crafts movement, from his essay, The Nature of Gothic. He believed strongly that genuine art is the expression of man's pleasure in his handiwork, and that we should take care to do things well in all aspects of society, no matter the profession. That there should be more pride in excellence of achievement rather than in peculiarity of employment. He writes, "And yet more, in each profession, no master should be too proud to do its hardest work. The painter should grind his own colors, the architect work in the mason's yard with his men. The master manufacturer be himself a more skillful operative than any man in his mills, and the distinction between one man and another be only in experience and skill, and the authority and wealth which these must naturally and justly obtain." He talks about the messiness and the imperfection of Gothic or medieval ornamentation and architecture, but explains that the Christian builders were okay with this imperfection and having the detail or ornament somewhat taking on a life of its own, because in their efforts to build up from the bottom something that aspires toward the grand and toward the higher, they didn't need to have everything worked out in such fixed forms. Also, they didn't really know how to proceed, and they were in the process of creating from zero, with the styles that they were used to and which surrounded them. This approach contrasts to the ancient Greek and Assyrian architects in the sense that these followed rigid discipline and kept the workmen to following strict procedure for perfection. Ornament was subservient to the overall artistic vision and had almost no freedom of its own in order to protect the intellect of the higher form or product. Although Christian art is still subservient to the ideal, it wasn't pure ornament with its own will, which Ruskin calls revolutionary ornament, his third type. I think Ruskin's point applies so well to the Balbuso sisters. Their best work is that which tries to get at a more complex, imperfect, and messy but spiritually elevated interpretation of reality. And their smooth, simpler pictures are lacking. The better works are strange and spiritually a bit confused, taking on a higher-minded grandeur, which means less stereotyped, more curious, adventurous, and somewhat experimental, mixing different styles together. This is what true art is. John Ruskin wrote about this so clearly, and it helped me to word my thoughts on my opinion of these girls even better. It of course doesn't just go for them, but for all art, all the time. He says that we fail when we prefer the perfectness of the lower nature to the imperfection of the higher, not considering that, as judged by such a rule, all the brute animals would be preferable to man, because more perfect in their functions and kind, and yet are always held as inferior to him. So also in the works of man, those which are more perfect in their kind are always inferior to those which are, in their nature, liable to more faults and shortcomings. For the finer the nature, the more flaws it will show through the clearness of it. And it is a law of this universe that the best things shall be seldomest seen in their best form. The wild grass grows well and strongly one year with another, but the wheat is, according to the greater nobleness of its nature, liable to the bitterer blight. And therefore, while in all things that we see or do, we are to desire perfection and strive for it, we are nevertheless not to set the meaner thing in its narrow accomplishment above the nobler thing in its mighty progress, not to esteem smooth minuteness above shattered majesty. I find this quote both beautiful and insightful, and to put it into perspective, we can look at some of the more technological-looking posters that the girls have made for various projects. A lot of these, especially those made for advertising, look horrible. Suddenly they seem totally nihilistic and dead. This is because there's less effort in composing a picture for a more distinguished time and theme. These are lazy, too computerized, and lacking human detail and organic texture and individuality in each inch of the picture. And it looks like the design has been simply programmed onto it. This lack of really trying is why a lot of our art and culture today doesn't really move us. because our ideals are somewhere else, in convenience, automation, and materialism. Look at the artistic difference between this picture and that poster. This one is blocky, fake, computer generated. There's no beauty or intricacy to be found. The portraits I like by them are those that look individual, weird, unique, and interesting, where they're saying something stylistically, showing something differently than other artists, with beauty and composition, true artfulness. These AI-looking ones here are the opposite because there's no genuineness, no creativity. As I read this last quotation from the preface by William Morris for this book, another founder of the arts and crafts movement, keep in mind that this was written after the deleterious effects of the Industrial Revolution. He wrote about this book by John Ruskin. To some of us, when we first read it, now many years ago, it seemed to point out a new road on which the world should travel. And in spite of all the disappointments of 40 years, and although some of us, John Ruskin amongst others, have since learned what the equipment for that journey must be, and how many things must be changed before we are equipped, yet we can still see no other way out of the folly and degradation of civilization. For the lesson which Ruskin here teaches us is that art is the expression of man's pleasure in labor, that it is possible for man to rejoice in his work, for, strange as it may seem to us today, there have been times when he did rejoice in it. And lastly, that unless man's work once again becomes a pleasure to him, the token of which change will be that beauty is once again a natural and necessary accompaniment of productive labor, all but the worthless must toil in pain and therefore live in pain.